Hello, yeah. Could people please come in? We want to start. Us. So this is the most important thing. Because it's not good if you're speaking in
I speak
from here. Is you like Javier. So.
Alberto.
We have to wait a few minutes.
Yes.
So, then I think, so, good afternoon. There's still people coming in, but I think we have to start. My name is Josef Weidenholzer. I will lead you through this afternoon. It is a great pleasure to have a very special guest, Gianni Pittella, the president of our group until a few weeks ago, and now very active in Italian politics. We are very sad that we don't have him anymore on the European level, and his wife just told me that she's very happy that he's here now and he's more available. Gianni, the floor is yours.
Grazie.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Joseph. I'm very happy to be here. In fact, I'm feeling quite emotional about being here. I'd like to thank the group of the Socialists and Democrats. I was a member of the S&D group, and I'd like to greet the Secretary General and everyone else. I can see Ellie Schlein, an MEP, and the excellent chairwoman of the S&D in the Committee of the Regions, Katiusha Marini, and I can see so many friends in the audience. Chairman Baron Crespo is a stalwart. He has been a stalwart of world socialism and has been for a long time. I'd like to thank Udo Bullmann for having kept this excellent initiative of the School of Democracy. And I must admit that Francesco Ronghi suggested this at the beginning of my term, and I also took part in this, and therefore I feel very proud of this brainchild. In Italy, we're talking about something that has really changed the political scene in Italy, and now we have a certain government in power. But you come from all over the world, and you know that what has happened here in Italy has also happened elsewhere, and that the world scene and the way that people feel around the world are the result of processes that have been going on for years and years. And it is with a sense of pride that I say that the S&D AfD group is one of the few that has denounced and tried to fight against the root causes of this. I don't want to bore you and go back in time to the Berlin Wall, although, in fact, we should go back and talk about the Berlin Wall, because that's where it all started. That was the beginning of a profound change, a change that was, a world that was split in two, like an apple. On the one hand, the so-called good ones, the West, and then on the other, they had the authoritarians, the East, so East versus West. And this collapse, of course, had a huge impact on the progressive forces, and it duped us. It made us think that we'd won the match, that it was game over, and that we felt that then everything was going to be wonderful, and that the progressive forces would flank the world from then onwards. However, it didn't happen this way. And we learned the lesson that it isn't just, the opposition isn't just between democracy and authoritarianism. It's also about equality and inequality. We had unbridled capitalism. Then we had the power of finance in the world, and this has really spread everywhere. And these high spreads, and I'm not happy when the spread is broad, because it means that politics are weak. Globalization isn't something new in the history of mankind. But this has gone hand in hand with technology progressing in leaps and bounds, and it has been very difficult to understand the impact of this tumultuous change. Joseph, we have tried to understand, and you probably remember this big meeting or jamboree that we had in Brussels, and I'd like to thank all of those who contributed to it. And Paul Collier was one of the main protagonists of this initiative. I remember Paul's analysis. He talked about these new anxieties and concerns of European societies, especially communities in the South, that were overcome by a sense of pessimism, and which I found extremely difficult to deal with. I've been to Africa, Asia, and Latin America, and we're talking about societies that have a very young population, and the elderly are saying that our societies are worse, and that young people fear that what the future holds is worse than the situation at the moment. But despite that, one cannot point the finger at those who are expressing this. It's been 10 years since the infamous economic crisis of 2008. And at the moment, in Italy, and not only in Italy, people are on average worse off than they were 10 years ago. And I agree with Paul Collier. There are two types of new inequalities: a spatial inequality and a social type of inequality. This is what has happened over the last few years. He talked about spatial inequality. He talked about Oxford and London on the one hand and Sheffield on the other. But this comparison applies to Italy as well. I am someone who started off in the South and then became an MEP, and I'm now a senator. And I come from Aurea, from Basilicata in southern Italy. So as south as you can go. It's further south, and you've got Naples, then further down you've got Potenza, then you've got Lauria further down. So I really come from the outskirts of Potenza. My father was a politician, but above all a doctor, and he'd go and visit his patients on a donkey. He'd go up the hills in order to get to the most far-flung houses. So I am saying this because I want to explain to you, especially those who've come from abroad, what Italy was and what Italy is now. And now we are in Reggio Emilia, one of the wealthiest countries, whether it's culturally, in other ways. You'll be going to visit the Cervi Institute, the Cervi Foundation. We're talking about world-ranking companies. We've got Parma Ham, we've got Parmigiano Reggiana, the Barilla, Panini, Max Mara, Ferrari. So we have high-speed train connections to Florence, Rome, and so many other cities. You'll find students, entrepreneurship, and so on the one hand, we have a very local culture, but we're also very international. So Italy isn't just about Milan. I'm sure that Katyusha will be able to tell you about the situation in the region of Umbria. However, Italy is a vast country, and there are a lot of inequalities, both on a material level, on a wage level, and there are different dreams and aspirations and different hopes. So when I was standing for elections for the Senate, so many parents in Campania and Basilicata, where I was standing for the elections, said to me, our children are going to study and work in the north. What can we do to make them come back to our regions? How can we keep them here? So we have these spatial divisions. We have this split. We have the periphery and the center. You've got different regions. And then you've got a different type of inequality, which is social inequality. Those who have studied and haven't studied. Those who have appropriate training, which is tailored to the labor market, and those who don't. And this is the root cause of discontent. And this discontent has brought anti-establishment parties to the fore and to government. Those who have been in difficult situations have often turned their back to the center-left. This happened in 2010. In March, the PD, the Partito Democratico, my party, did very badly in the southern regions and outlying regions in Italy. The same has happened in the UK. The left has fared badly. They tend to do well in cosmopolitan areas where people have toast and avocados and have chai lattes, where people are in favor of civil liberties and that are extremely worried about the environment and do volunteer work. And of course, this is wonderful, but there is a huge split, an identity split between them and the rest of the country. So how do we bring all of this together? It seems that the identity of Milanese cosmopolitans is a lot more similar to the cosmopolitans who live in Berlin and London, a lot more similar to the identity of those young people who live in Lauria, Potenza, and Corciano or Perugia. So knowledge is concentrated in big hubs where knowledge and training flourishes, but we haven't managed to pass on these skills that are thriving to the periphery. We seem to be talking about two different identities, those who are living well, who are cosmopolitans, who identify with Europe, and who are clamoring for more integration. They are our voters. They vote for us. If we were to go and look at exactly who votes for us, those who voted for Emma Bonino's party, or the PD, this is the kind of voter profile I'm talking about. But we cannot just be the party of those who are integrated, of those who are cosmopolitan, of those who are living well and who have received an education. We have to be a party that represents, or an alliance or coalition that represents those who don't feel they are well off, those who have been marginalized and sidelined for geographically, socially, because of family reasons or because of a lack of education. So we have to become the party that will reward and help those who have certain needs. I believe that these ideas should underpin a new identity. In the left, I think we've often had a kind of cultural individualism that has been linked to common identity. I'd like to give you an example. It's a bad example, and of course I'm trying to fight against this. I'm trying to fight against Viktor Orban and Matteo Salvini. Viktor Orban, the president of Hungary, the Prime Minister of Hungary, has managed to forge a common identity across Hungary. And despite the fact that he is behaving shamefully by closing universities, by gagging the media, he is getting people's votes because he has created certain identities around certain themes, even if they are kind of, even if they are what I would call defensive issues. As the center-left, as the socialists, the PD, and other left-wing groups, we have to take a good look at ourselves and shoulder our part of the blame. Now, it shouldn't just be about exceptions. We shouldn't just be talking to a handful of people, 15 or 20 people. We need to have mass and people that will be a reference point. Now, these people that will be our anchor, that are European and outward-looking and that have studied, but should also be the 50-year-old that didn't manage to work, or that is a woman who's been discriminated against, or an unemployed person, or a young person who has a dream that they cannot fulfill. So what I'm trying to say is that we shouldn't just be constrained to the radical chic. It shouldn't just be about civil liberties, which of course are sacrosanct, and of course we have to protect them. And now we have a new minister, a former MEP, that talked about certain families and aired certain ideas that we have to fight against, in the same way that we have to fight against the populism of Salvini, who says certain things. Of course, now we're going to have to wait and see whether he's going to do them. But he has been saying that he wants to chase migrants away, and that he's going to return these migrants. But of course, to do that, you have to find countries that will accept to take these people back. This is populism. And of course, it is our duty to fight against this. But our battle shouldn't just hinge on this. We have to look at social challenges. What about the flat tax? They've been talking about the flat tax. I don't think it will become a reality, but it is so unfair because I think it gets rid of the principle of progressivity, and that is something that underpins a tax system, and the whole issue of fairness and the issue of citizens being equal. You have to help those who are the weakest and not reward those who earn the most. So that's what our battle should hinge on. It should also hinge on how we can create jobs. And then this whole issue of the citizenship allowance, the Gentiloni government started looking into this, and we've talked about this in the European Parliament. How is this different to a check that everyone can get without them doing anything specific? I don't think that would be realistic either or viable. Well, I'm actually not going to read out my whole speech, but let me say that world socialism and the left and center left here in Italy can rebuild a whole area that I touched upon to make sure it's part of its identity. But then there's the whole issue of the future, and this applies to Europe as well. We have to be crystal clear. The critical defense of the status quo is a mistake. We were one of those who always fought to change Europe, not to make sure that it becomes a mummy and have its flaws set in stone. Of course, there have been achievements and successes, but there are things that don't work. Why shouldn't we be able to say it? I think that's very different to trying to undermine Europe. And then, of course, the yellow-green government has looked at this, and I'm not talking about calling the euro into question. We're talking about reviewing the architecture and the governance, and if the governance isn't there, we have to do something about it. The June summit might actually end up being a very important one, because the economics and finance ministers will look at this. They'll look at injecting more flexibility into the Stability and Growth Pact. These are struggles that we've been involved in for a long time with Roberto Gualtieri in the Parliament and other colleagues. So it's not that we've got the five-star movement in Savona and all of a sudden whip this ace up their sleeve, talking about a bureaucratic Europe that doesn't want to change anything. But those who don't want to change anything are those states that have right-wing governments. And this has to be clear. If we don't change things when it comes to economic and financial governance, if we don't take steps forward when it comes to migration and asylum seekers, it's because of people like Orban and the Visegrad countries. And those are in the hands of the right wing, and that has to be clear. And if Mr. Salvini wants to strike a deal with the Visegrad countries and Mr. Orban, then it means that Italy will end up in a crazy situation, and their stance flies in the face of the interests of Italians and Europeans. Brexit, the decline of the traditional European parties, the difficulties the EU face and other related issues are no coincidence. They mirror the political situation, the fact that we have doubts about the free market, the issues pertaining to free movement and trade. We have to find new answers. But please, be careful. It's not about overcoming this split between the right and left and this ecumenical approach taken by Conte and this third. We're talking about very clear political answers that look at the environment, socialism, democracy, and equality. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gianni. I think it was very important that you were also linking the European and the Italian questions, and it just tells you that we are part of our nation state as well as of Europe, and we have two identities, and it is also very good to stress and make it very clear that there is not an either or, it is both, it is identity and it is also social questions. And this afternoon we'll deal with these aspects, identity and citizenships. We have two speakers invited, Katiuscia Marini and Peter Greco. I will introduce them a little bit later more in detail. Before we start with the presentation, we're very happy that Gianni is joining us here, so there will be a round of questions and interactions. We want to make it as lively as possible. I would ask the rapporteurs from the working groups, and I have been told that the discussions were very intensive. It took longer than it was planned, so this is a good sign for our family. I would start with workshop 1 and ask Stefania Pavel and Alberto Bortolotti to come here to the podium and give us a short summary what you have discussed, because it's also a good input for our guest speakers then to already deal with your problems more in detail. So Stefania and Alberto, please come here. Yeah, thank you. So if you the floor is yours.
Honorable speech givers, dear colleagues, today I'm here with Alberto to brief you on what we have discussed throughout our workshop, which was called The Revolt of the Peripheries Against the Center. However, we didn't look at it as a revolt, but rather as a revolution, also as a quest for a solution. There might be no universal recipe of success. There might be no panacea for this disease of inequality that is currently plaguing Europe. However, we tried. We had an endeavor to investigate, to have a rather clinical approach to inequality, and to see how the social democratic approach can assess the health state of the European democracy. So we came up with some sort of a subscription for it. We had an anamnesis. We tried to look for the root causes of inequality. We came up with a diagnosis and a treatment that my colleague is going to go into detail. So, which was the root cause of inequality? Mr. Barca came up with an interesting euphemism for populism, authoritarian dynamic. An authoritarian dynamic that led to hermetic societies where intolerance is escalating, where the institutional cluster is being looked as distrustful. This inequality ailment inflicted upon our society simmering tensions, a recognition inequality, people that feel out of pace with these times, that they're being left behind, and also a very pernicious capitalist zeitgeist in which companies, multinational companies, are no longer regulated. They're out of our grasp, and they took the reins and they set the pace of development within our societies. So we have concluded that there were wrongful treatments for this ailment. There was the Krugman effect, in which corporations were left to take the lead. The Monsanto effect, where there occurred this urban myopism. There were hubs, cities, where decisions are taken, whereas the rural areas are being left in obscurity. But we think we can have these regions taken from being speechless to being outspoken. And last but not least, we pigeonholed subsidies as being very negative for Europe, in the sense that they confer an illusionary cohesiveness for the periphery that is being superficially kept contained. Nonetheless, this chronic disease is not to be like this forever. We think that inequality can be alleviated, finally treated. We must aim and attain a sustainable, substantial freedom. And we try to give a new lease of life to European democracy, a social democratic new lease of life. Let's try to move from heterogeneous to homogeneous policies, from an elitistic to an egalitarian decision-making process, and last but not least, from an illusionary to an implementable cohesiveness.
Thank you very much, Stefania. Alberto?
So, we also thought about some solutions on these problems. So these are 6. The first one is reinvent conflicts. So it means that we should try to think on creative manners to make people everywhere being part of a solution, to recognize their role and respect their identity. The second one is about democratic taxes. So on our top priority, we should try to fix the demanding role of states in taxation terms in order to redesign the Milanovic elephant curve in a more regular way, let's say. So the third one is about intermediate bodies. So the addressing policy of socialists might be very open to the civic society. So we should strongly encourage the participation of intermediate bodies like unions or NGOs into the European issues. This process means, on one hand, influencing them to adapt to the current situations, and because now they have like some old approaches, and on the other hand, listening their claims, and in order to give them a right democratic legitimacy. The fourth one is about local actors and national actors. So local administrations are very important in the European project. So we might enforce local power in negotiation tables, promoting a strong dialogue between national governments and mayors through the European Committee of the Regions. So actually we know that the European Commission is setting the new financial frame. So in this perspective, we should take this opportunity in order to empower the Committee of the Region. The fifth point is about special regulation for international corporations. We should tackle the no regulation scenario through a common European regulation, and for bigger corporations, of course, in order to make them paying the right level of taxes. So the new taxation motto might be 28 states, one solution. And the last one, creating a platform for European active citizens. So we might use part of the European funds in the development of experimental networks for participants of European democracy, in order to create a sort of agora where people can shape policies before they're going to be voted. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm now asking the two rapporteurs from Workshop 2, Multiculturalism and its Critics, Anna Abdi and Flavia Gabriela Sandu, for their summaries.
Hi, everyone. I'm Anna Abdi from Albania. We were in the group of multiculturalism. We were lucky enough to have a very interesting panel, which had a very constructive debate with René Cuprès, which is a political ideologist and a journalist. And he shared with us a perspective of multiculturalism. So he thinks that if we think migration is easy, we are wrong. He thinks that it is ill-managed and it is a big problem. So multiculturalism is messy, undefined, and has a lot of damage in our societies. So a concept that puts social democracy in suicide regarding to René is the replacing, because we have come to a replacing of inequality to diversity and the economy into culture. And we are facing the threat that the middle class is replaced by academic professionals and migrants. So he thinks that the problem is that the majority culture will become the minority culture. And this later on will produce populism, anger, and anxiety. So this is a wrong concept if we analyze the Canada, USA, and Australia model. which regarding to René is very selective with the migrants. So he sees multiculturalism in a way that we have to take integration by assimilation, participation, and cultural freedom. So we have to adopt the basic rules, the rule of law and democracy. We have to adopt a labor market to put their contribution to educate, work for the wealth of the state, and the cultural freedom by freedom in religion, culture, and rituals. So we should embrace and rethink the concept of multiculturalism in low and middle class doesn't feel threat anymore. Migration regarding René is a topic to be handled with care. On the other hand, we had Marine Khan, which is a reporter at Financial Times and works in Brussels. She expressed a different opinion from René, and her vision put in the floor the example of Britain and also the France. So how she sees multiculturalism. In Western Europe, people are uncomfortable with pluralism regarding to marine. So if one native wants to consider you a native, if you are not an indigene, this is the main problem. So if you don't embrace the language, the religion, or even if you later do, if you're not an indigene, it will need like 3 or 4 generations that you are really considered a European and you are really adopted regarding to her. So we have a class of cultures, which is the lack of sense of who they really are. Regarding marine, we have confident Western Europeans that embrace all different cultures and all human beings. And on the other hand, we have unconfident ones that find multiculturalism as a threat. So how to deal with the diversity? In a robust way, the worst example is the French example to her, which to be considered French, you should know French language, you should eat French, you should embrace their culture, you should have Christian views, and maybe in your 4th generation you can be respected or feel accepted. But on the other hand, she says that is very lucky to be born in UK, and she feels relaxed to what it means to be British because the society there is more open to multiculturalism. So the thing is that we have to work with the countries that say, be like us or get out. They have a sense of insecurity of the majority. So what we are exactly trying to tell to them, these are the points that we really discussed. And so on the other hand, another person that was in our panel was the distinguished figure Cécile Cayenne, which was Minister of Integration in 2013 and 2014. And she shared a very beautiful perception on when we talk about multiculturalism, we talk about democracy, and if we really want to talk about migration, we don't have to see it as a problem, because in this way we are denying the human rights, the rights to talk and to exist. So if we see migration as a problem, we're actually denying ourselves and our human rights. So in a modern society, we should be confronted with a diverse opinion. So EU is based on these values, and the unity is based on diversity and in openness. So it gives value to have multiculturalism. If we care of human rights, we should embrace the differences among us and see it as a positive outcome. I think that overall this is what we discussed. There were a lot of questions that Flavia would like to highlight and the responses that we got, but the common problem that we raised during our workshop was the labor force and let's say the division of society in intellectual and just migrants and lowering the middle class in Europe. This was what we brought into form. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I will try to be quick if we are not over time. Basically, during this discussion, we went over a lot of additional points to multiculturalism itself, because the debate itself is quite wide and ties in a lot of external factors. We also went over migration, welfare state, refugee crisis, historical perspectives on the whole situation, and human rights, and we analyzed what other countries outside Europe had done when multiculturalism had to be included. There have been various questions from the public, some of them about what are the solutions that could be brought into the integration process, others about when is the integration process considered actually successful in the view of a nativist, and other questions about if the whole view on the minorities is all negative view on the minorities is a little bit blown out of proportions, and the view that is presented in the media about the negative effects of multiculturalism is actually as serious in reality. In all honesty, we didn't really have a real conclusion, because in such a wide debate with so many varied opinions, it's kind of hard for us all to agree on one thing. So from what I've seen at the end of the discussion, when the time ran out, the one point that seemed that everyone sort of agreed with is that when it comes to multiculturalism, migration itself is not the problem. The real problem is the poor management of the migration, and the lack of shared vision and shared solution among the countries of the European Union. So for that, we should probably work better together as a union in order to create a proper multicultural society.
Yeah, and
Thank you.
we would also like to highlight a question that was raised during the discussion, but it really didn't get an answer. It was also discussed last night by the professor from Oxford. How do we deal with the labor market, and how can we, maybe the panelists can help us with some brief answers. How can we, let's say, not become, to make the immigrants not be seen by the middle class as a threat for their position? So what efforts should we put, and what platforms we as social democrats should raise so that the labor markets become inclusive and we no longer see migrants as a threat in our society?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We will take the question. Thank you. Workshop 3, Lucia Scala and Casper van Wallendale. Right? This is my name.
Ok, scusate. Ciao a tutti, io sono Lucia Scala e vengo dall'Italia.
I'm Lucia Scala. I come from Italy. We were part of a workshop that was called Who's Afraid of the Roots? The title of the workshop was meant to be controversial. The reason we came up with it was because we wanted to reflect what roots are all about. And one of the speakers, Andrea, said that trees have roots while people have legs to be able to move. That's what he said. We had Ellie Schlein, who was our moderator, and we wanted to thank her very much. Anya Skrzypek spoke. I don't know if I've pronounced her surname properly. And we also had Andrea Goldstein, and we looked at identity. We also did some practical activities which were extremely interesting. First, we were asked by Anya to draw a line which started off with our date of birth. So that was at the very beginning, and then the end of the line was the present, and then we were supposed to draw a curve that was supposed to reflect our personal life, our country's history, and European history. And it was extremely interesting because we compared our drawings to other participants, and it was interesting to see the differences in perception, even when it comes to a certain country's history or European history. Some saw certain events as positive, others saw them as negative, and it was actually a very interesting activity. And then Anya also wanted to look at the identity that the S&D should be, or social democracy should be striving for. We talked about the fact that the socialist democracy identity has been changing and to some extent has been lost, and that's because we have different issues. It's no longer about the working classes that we used to talk about in the past when social democracy saw the light of day, and then, of course, the whole issue of Deliveroo and those who work for Deliveroo who just work for a handful of euro without any social security. So in the past, we could say that social democracy dealt with those who contributed to the working classes, the lower working classes, while nowadays, as many have said, there is a kind of split between those who have studied less and those who have studied more and have more job mobility. Anya said that we should think about who our target audience is and what the new principles of social democracy should be. And then she also talked about the fact that it's more important to think about where we want to get to rather than where we've come from. Now, on the other practical activities, there was a suggestion to have a kind of survey. They looked at identity and citizenship, and we compared the different answers. One of the more controversial questions was whether it had to do with our nationality or European nationality, language or city or religion, and which of these we identified more with. There were many different answers, and one of the issues that was raised was, does European citizenship clash with the idea of national citizenship or not? There were lots of different answers, and the whole point is to try and build a concept of European citizenship that can go hand in hand with the concept of national citizenship. But at the moment, there are huge challenges in relation to this. The right wing has now forged a coalition that really focuses on nationality and belonging, and the idea of belonging. And we want to think of the whole concept of belonging as something positive and not negative. We don't want to have this them and us idea. We want people to feel that they are part of a community that they can help forge. And then we also talked about Euroscepticism and the fact that national media report on European successes, portraying them as national successes that have been achieved by national governments. And then we also looked at certain areas less protected by Europe, and of course they also look at those areas where Europe has failed. Then we had another debate that focused on migration and the fact that migration has become a problem over the last few years. We heard from Giovanna, who had some interesting remarks, and she talked about the sense of insecurity back when everyone had enough money, the political scene was calm and there was a bright future, resources were allocated and there were a lot of policies to promote cultural integration and so on and so forth. But now that we're gripped by so many fears, because now that there's unemployment, people just act instinctively and don't really use their head and reason properly. So therefore the question is, how can we reassure people, but not in a populist way? Someone talked about Mussolini's paternalism and drew parallels between that and Salvini, who wants to reassure everyone and tell them, we're here, don't worry, we'll sort everything out. So social democracy faces a challenge to resolve this issue, to try and make sure that people feel they belong to a community, but that the sense of belonging is inclusive and that it is based on rights but also social obligations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lucia.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Kacper, I come from Poland. I just wanted to add a couple of things to what has already been said. When it comes to the part that was in which we listened to our guests and their input, there was a very interesting personal account of Andrea Rizza-Goldstein, which was basically his personal story of identity, which was a very interesting and moving introduction to the topic itself, because the topic we covered, the topic of roots, is something we don't usually talk that much about in the political left. The story that was told by Andrea started in his hometown of Bolzano, which is a German majority, which was a German majority town in Italy, in which later the Italian national identity was tried to be built, but it was built on grounds that often referred to the Mussolini and the fascist legacy. So that's an example of a story of how identity is one thing and how the identity is built, on which basis it is built, is another thing. Then he told us a story about spending his childhood years in Yugoslavia, in Zagreb, where he attended a Jewish kindergarten located next to a mosque that was located on a square dedicated to the anti-fascist resistance, right? So also another sort of mixed identity story in a nutshell. And then the last story, the very moving one, was a very current story. So the story about the Balkan route of migration. We heard a lot of stories regarding the reality that migrants face on various borders within Europe and at the outskirts of Europe. The story of refugee camps that are co-funded by the European Union, that are built also in our names. The story of barbed fences on the Hungarian-Serbian border that are also co-funded by the European Union. So the story of migration and the story of refuge seeking in the current times. And what I think allowed us to try to answer the question that is asked in the topic of this workshop. So, who is afraid of the roots? Was the last group activity, and that was a very interesting one. We worked on a document that is called, it's a sort of manifesto, that is called A Tentative Decalogue for the Art of Inter-Ethnic Togetherness. And that the author of this manifesto was Alexander Langer, who was a member of European Parliament for South Tyrol, and who wrote this manifesto as a response to the experiences of the war in former Yugoslavia. And there were a couple of ideas that we thought were pretty important that we drew from this manifesto. The first one was the idea that we need to acknowledge and appreciate multiple belongings and multiple identities. It means that it hardly ever happens that a person has a single identity. If we attempt to think that every single one of us has just one identity, then it's pretty easy to create a division that is based on this identity. If we perceive ourselves as members of the nation and we think it's the only identity that we have, then it's pretty easy to distinguish ourselves from the members of other nations. The same with religion, the same with ethnicity, the same with the language. We all have multiple belongings, and that's okay. That's something that we need to appreciate and acknowledge. The second idea that we took from there was the idea of gray zones. It might not be entirely clear as a gray zone, but then gray zones, according to Alexander Langer, were situations in which people can coexist, interact, and live together in communities despite having various identities. So that's the idea that we don't need to build a community based on a shared identity. We can build a community based on the fact that we accept and acknowledge our multiple belongings. And also about the roots, there was Langer's idea that there is a common root that we all instinctively share, and this root is saying no to violence. And that's something that we should treat as a basis for our cooperation, no matter our various identities. And then we also talked about the fact that identities can be either inclusive or exclusive. So that's something similar to yesterday's lecture, in which we talked about a purpose that can be inclusive or exclusive for a certain group. So there are, we should focus on the identities that we can treat as inclusive and which can bring us together instead of tearing us apart. And then the last point is that we should not only reinvent the language, we should also reivindicate the language and reivindicate the terminology that has been stolen by the far right and the right wing in general. So that's the terminology in which the entire talk about identity, about the roots, about tradition, about the nation, about whatever, it's entirely taken by the far right politicians, and that's the kind of terminology that we need to reivindicate in order to turn it into something that is inclusive and that is a positive force for the good. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think we see that there was really very, very intensive discussion in the workshops, and we should actually have visited all of them, but this is impossible. It's easier to share identities than to be in the same venues. The first speaker now is Katiusha Marini. She is the president of the group of the Party of European Socialists in the Committee of the Regions, and she is the president of Umbria. And Umbria is one of the remaining still progressive areas in Italy. Okay, so the floor is yours.
Grazie.
Thank you very much.
Grazie.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. And I'd like to thank the S&D group for organizing this seminar. It's a great pleasure for me to take questions later and answer. I'd like to have this discussion with all of you who've taken part in this seminar, because I think that this is a very interesting part for us. It gives us ideas and food for thought. I did prepare some speaking points, but I'd also like to say that I agree with the thoughts in the introductory remarks of Gianni Pittella, so therefore I will not go into great detail on certain national issues, and instead of that I'm going to focus on my own experience and my own interpretation or reading of what has happened here in Italy, in my region. My region is in central Italy. It is in an area where most local authorities have had center-left coalitions. Over the last 50 years, we've had center-left governments. We've had the PD at the helm for such a long time. Umbria, with Tuscany and Emilia-Romagna, are the only regions that have had this very uniform political scene. But in the elections in 2018, Umbria actually had results similar to the center-north in Italy. The League, the Northern League, did extremely well, and therefore the center-right coalition did very well too. And what is extremely interesting when thinking about this issue of the peripheries and the center that you looked at one of the workshops, I'd like to give you the example of Perugia, my city, the capital of the region, which is kind of similar to where we are now because of the economic and social situation. This city, Perugia, in what we've always called the Red Belt. The Red Belt is this belt or area of working class neighborhoods and farmer rural areas, which then became more urban, but still had voters that would traditionally vote for the left. And despite that, the League got a foothold. And then there were parts of the city that always voted more moderately, if I may put it that, and often for the center-right, and that Italian sociologists have said it contains a lot of thinkers, so academics, teachers, more social protection, and so on and so forth, actually voted more for the PD in the last elections. Gianni talked about what happened in Italy as a whole, but it's extremely interesting to look at what has happened in specific regions that have always voted a certain way in the past and have voted for the center-left. So the whole issue of the center and peripheries isn't just about what's happening on a European school, this split between towns, cities, urban areas, and versus rural areas and the peripheries in the socioeconomic sense. But it's also very interesting to look what is happening in our own communities and our own societies within our country. So this is something that we can look at a European level, but then also look at it on a national level. Now, there's another issue which another workshop looked at, and what has been a characteristic feature of Reggio Emilia and other towns with the PD at the helm. We've always talked about the social democrat progressive forces. Who were they? They were those who wanted to have businesses and work and economic policies to make sure that the public service network worked properly. We were those who had certain recipes, maybe even alternate recipes compared to the center-right, but who really were focused on economic growth, helping SMEs, a backbone of the area, which was very much about local businesses, local communities that created a lot of jobs and were protected from what was happening in the rest of the country and the rest of the world, and therefore offered job stability. And we also had this social net and welfare pillar. But all of this changed because of globalization. We can no longer imagine economic policies that just focus on local communities and the local reality. What you said about multinationals is extremely important. I have been in the steel industry. I've worked for a German steel company. And, of course, there are a lot of contradictions. And then the welfare state, as we've known it, is no longer sustainable because of the crisis in public finances and the way that public finances work. So we're also facing a huge cultural challenge. So how has the right, how has the Northern League in particular tried to deal with the challenge? I'm not just thinking of the Northern League, but also the Five-Star Movement that are actually closer to our positions than we can imagine. If you look at their economic and social plans and recipes, they're not very dissimilar. They've gone for a simple answer. They are saying that we have this challenge and therefore we have to protect ourselves. So economic protectionism, protecting our own businesses. We've got to close off our borders. That, of course, is linked to the reaction to migration. They are saying that we have to protect our traditional identity. The Northern League is not only racist. I couldn't believe it that the president of an important region with a lot of experience said in an electoral rally organized by the Northern League that if to protect this community we need to be racist, then I'm not ashamed to say that I'm racist. So this was a colleague of mine. I think that this just shows that we have overstepped the limit, and this is no longer, there's no decency any longer. So our societies are no longer homogeneous. I'm talking about this in so many different points of view. So they're saying that their recipe is based on guaranteeing the homogeneity of society. So this recipe, this idea is pretty simple. It's probably simple to apply. And this is what they're feeding our citizens. So we have an enormous challenge. So they're portraying Europe to be very far away, and there's the whole issue of migration and sovereignty. So how can people feel that Europe is something close to them, and how do we look at the issue of migration as an issue that pertains to the present? And that I would see as an opportunity for the present. And how do we tackle the issue of globalization without taking a nationalist approach? I think that this challenge is something that the PD faces in Italy, but that the socialist and democrat family in Europe faces as a whole. We need to be able to define a new area, a new space. Is there a new type of social democracy for the 21st century, and what kind of features should it have? Is it enough to have economic and social policies and certain recipes? We made a mistake. We felt it was just a matter of policies. We have to rebuild the identity of peoples that shouldn't just be the sum of minorities that we protect and interpret, because all these minorities coupled together do not make people. So it shouldn't just be about protecting migrants, protecting the rights of homosexual couples, protecting women. We have to rebuild a group where it's not just a sum of minorities, but people who feel that they have a project, a vision, and who identify with this and future. So not only are the people disillusioned for material reasons, but it's more than that. It's the lack of proper prospects. People feel there is no hope. People might feel they are relatively well off, but the parents feel that their children face an uncertain future filled with fear, concerns, and anxiety. So we have to rebuild this. We need a stronger project which is more appealing, which is more attractive and appealing. Because there's so many words like this that have been used. I really am on the same page here as Gianni. I think that we lost on the cultural front rather than the political front. We've become a minority on the cultural front, not only in Italian society, but in European society to a great extent. I think that we have to stand by the European project, not just when it comes to institutions, broadening democracy, making sure there is more European sovereignty, but we will only be successful if we manage to have a European people who feel that there is a future. And of course, we mustn't overlook young people. The Five Star Movement, the Northern League, and other populist movements, their ranks are full of young people. So we need you out there building this project. You need to be out there with ideas, and you need to have an impact so that we can redesign the socialist family. I've heard lots of interesting things here, including in the workshops, and I think that this can feed in to a kind of work program. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Peter Greco, I hope I pronounce it correct. He's from Hungary, and he is also dealing with the question of fake news, conspiracy theories, and most of the things we are discussing are also created by others, and they are talking us into a reality which is actually not existing, but people are believing that this reality exists. So we round up these first inputs, and then we have enough time, I hope, for discussions, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the organizers for the opportunity to be here, and I'm really glad that I can talk after someone who represents Umbria, because I spent half year in Umbria, Perugia, as a student back to when I was 21 years old. So, and I have very good memories of the city. That
you could start to speak in Italian now.
No, unfortunately not. I have a very bad sense of languages, and I'm happy that I'm coping with English. Unfortunately, I cannot speak anything else practically. I tried to learn it, but I did not really succeed, to be honest. So the topic I'm going to talk about is a bit different than the main approach of the panel, but it will be, even for me, a rhetorical exercise to attach it to the points that the other speakers were talking about, and also the reporters brought up some very important points that I can reflect to. So if we talk about the why fake news and conspiracy theories can be so successful these days, one of the reasons are exactly that they are building on the existing frustrations, vulnerabilities, and sometimes even the feeling of alienation and the feeling of being on the periphery against the center. And for that respect, what I'm going to talk about fits into what was taught so far. Generally, we can say that fake news and conspiracy theories are on the rise in the whole Western world, and they pose a significant threat to democratic societies and even normal debates. This information, of course, existed all over the history. If we think about war propaganda, totalitarian regimes, and so on, but even if we take a look at the history of ancient Rome, of course, fake news existed all the time. What is the new in the new? Is there anything new in the modern post-truth logic that we talk about a lot? I think what brings something new into it is that beforehand in the history, usually fake news and conspiracy theories and disinformation could be really efficient in dictatorial and totalitarian regimes, or at least in regimes where there is a limited possibility to find contradicting narratives and look for information. In modern democratic societies, and this is classical brainwashing, what we can see in modern democratic societies nowadays is not that the politicians are washing the brain of the people, but the people are washing their brains themselves voluntarily, in the sense that they are choosing the fake news and conspiracy theory sources in order to strengthen their pre-existing political opinions. Social media just makes it easier, but this is not the origin of the problem. The origin of the problem, I think, is threefold. Superficiality of information processing. There were some studies involving Italian data processing and informatic experts that show that 59% of the tweets that we share are about articles that we never ever read. So we just read, of course, none of them here in the room have ever done that, but there are people who are just reading the title of the news and sharing it immediately without having a look on who wrote it, what it is about, how reliable the source is, and so on. So this kind of superficiality of information processing is, of course, general human phenomenon. There's too much information to process them deeply. Therefore, we are looking to ways how to simplify it. But this is a very good source of spreading fake news and conspiracy theories. The other one is confirmation bias. We are looking for information that just strengthens our pre-existing political views, and this is what the strength of fake news and conspiracy theories. They are usually providing a worldview that pretty much fits to ours, and we should not be fooled with the idea that fake news and conspiracy theories are always the ones that the others are receptive to. We are never. Everyone is receptive to fake news and conspiracy theories. Of course, there are some social circumstances that help them to spread: minority status, the feeling of alienation, political polarization, and so on. But this is something that targets everyone. And also the social validation of information. This is something that of course, confirmation bias is strengthened by the social media algorithms that just amplify this kind of logic that we are looking for the information that strengthens our pre-existing views. It creates echo chambers, and practically we see the opinions and information that we are interested in and that we usually agree in. And of course, it validates the social information and puts some lack of filters into the spread of fake news and conspiracy theories. So traditional media, of course, it's not fake news proof, but still the traditional editorial boards at least serve as a filters. Nowadays, in the social media-driven political world, it's much less the case. So the essence of post-truth is that we are brainwashing ourselves, and populist right-wing politicians are just bringing the soap. And social media is the tub where we are doing this all. So let me give a few examples how much impact fake news and conspiracy theories can make in Western elections. The US presidential elections, there was an investigation of BuzzFeed that found that in the last weeks of the campaign, the fake news trumped in outreach the mainstream news. So there were more engagements on the Facebook about the top 20 fake news stories, such as that Barack Obama is Muslim and he prays regularly to Allah in the White House and things like that. They were spread more. There were more impact of these fake news stories than the mainstream news stories. There were polls that showed, for example, that 49% of the Republican electorate believed that Hillary Clinton and his campaign team is running at a pedophile ring. Let's imagine how efficient this campaign team must have been, that they were could not just run a campaign, but at the same time run a pedophile ring as well. They had so much time and energy that they had enough time. Half of the Republican voters believed in that. And of course, we cannot say that half of the Republican voters are just stupid, are just undereducated, are just oppressed and losers of the globalization. Hatred and fear provide a very fertile ground for the spread of conspiracy theories. And also in Europe, there was a recent Eurobarometer poll that showed that more than a third of respondents, 37%, said they came across fake news every day or almost every day, and a further 31% said that this happens at least once a week. Who have met any fake news or conspiracy theories in their news feed? Let's raise your hands if you had already came across some. Okay, I think it's more than 1/3. Probably it's a good discussion topic afterwards, what kind of fake news you have met with. During the Brexit campaign, we could even see that there is a massive flood of disinformation. The Leave campaign used a lot. For example, Turkey is joining the European Union. If we follow a bit the negotiations, it doesn't seem to be very close, to say the least. There was a breaking point poster of the Leave campaign by Nigel Farage that practically showed that a lot of migrants are just at the borders of Great Britain. Of course, it was the border of Slovenia and not of Great Britain, but still it made a powerful message. In the German election, there were a lot of fake news that was spread about women that were raped by refugees. There is the infamous Lisa case where it was even quite widely distributed. Even in the French election, media outlets spread the message, practically pro-Russian fake news media outlets, that Emmanuel Macron is a Jewish gay banker, a US agent, and so on and so on. And in the Italian election, the recent Italian election, there are quite deep investigations that show that there was a massive network of fake news that were helping the Five Star Movement and the Liga, and with amplifying the topic of migration and putting it in the center of social media discussions. There were about 31% of the Twitter profiles, for example, that were openly anti-immigration and spread these platforms. Still, they could make it as a dominant discussion that drive 66% of the tweets. And in the recent Slovenian election, we could see that with the help of Viktor Orban, one of the masters of creating fake news and conspiracy theories in Hungary, the state-owned media is the biggest fake news industry, and conspiracy theories about George Soros is flooding Europe with migrants together with Brussels. This is the official line of the government. So he helped Janša to be the first on the election with media, with his personal presence, and with political consultancy. So it all shows that fake news and conspiracy theories have become a very powerful tool in electoral campaigns, and it undermines the political debates, and it fuels hatred, and it diverts the political discussions. What are the main topics when we come to fake news? It's immigration. Immigrants are taking away our jobs, taking away our culture, the territorial inequalities, social inequalities, of course, it's a topic. And generally, I would say that fake news are mainly about, and fake news spread by right-wing populist forces are mainly about the circus, not about the bread. So they build on our identities. They want to strengthen our vulnerable identities and send the message that we have to come together, our tribe have to come together and beat the other tribe. And this kind of tribalism is something that is connected to the post-truth logic, is something that can deeply undermine democratic societies in the future, and I think it's best if you prepare for the worst in that respect. And I think we should not ignore the geopolitical aspects of this whole. Fake news and conspiracy theories are mostly domestical in a lot of countries, but there are geopolitical players who are happy to invest in them, China and Russia. And what can we do about them? I think the most important thing is that we have to defend ourselves from the fake news and conspiracy theories. If we check the validity of the information, the source of the information, and the date of the information, and if everybody does it, I think it just would push back the fake news, investing more in education, talk more about this issue, and stepping up against the biggest exporters of this information. And I think this is a topic, and I'm happy to talk about it, that the S&D group have already talked quite a lot about. So I think it's good and it should be continued. Thank you very much for the attention.
Thank you very much, Peter. So I think at least one thing we can take for sure, that there was no fake news distributed by the rapporteurs, yeah? And I thank you for that. So we got the real truth, what had been discussed in the workshops. And this was also not fake, what you were discussing. So you were discussing problems you are concerned with, and you're really talking about the real things. I would suggest that we divide the discussion into two parts. I would take a short round, just questions and what has not been said, because you may have the feeling I wanted also to say something and it was not really communicated, but I do not want to have this very long, and then I think we should in the second part discuss also what can be done, what can we do, how can we become active, because it's the most important outcome for us, yeah, that we after these discussions know what to do. So the first round, short, do you have any questions or something had not been said properly? Yes, please. We have a mic, yeah? Okay. And if you just say your name, please, and take.
Sure. Hello, everybody. I'm Leon. I'm from Germany. I have a question to Mr. Kreko. And I want to ask, in Germany, we recently got a law last year which said that Facebook and Twitter have to search through their internet for fake news, for hate speech. It was implemented by a social democrat, Heiko Maas, also, and it got heavily criticized as it would be censoring the internet and it would be actually hurting free speech. How can a state actually work against those fake news without getting thought that they are somehow trying to censor anything?
I would collect the questions, and yes, please, in the back. You indicated. Who else wants to? Good, yeah.
Oh, thank you. I am Balázs from Hungary, and I would pose a question to Mr. Weidenholzer. It would be the following. What do you think, what is the responsibility of the S&D group that in member states the local social democratic parties are getting weaker and weaker for example, our Social Democratic Party, the so-called Hungarian Social Democratic Party, which we have in Hungary, is doing less and less for the society and getting worse and worse at the elections. And they are really weak at promoting the traditional social democratic values. What do you think, as the S&D group, should you try to improve your persistency and your actions at the local levels, at member states as well? Because you are the family of the European Socialists and Democrats. So I don't mean by that you should go and campaign yourselves at local levels. But what do you think? What you can do for at local levels for the local Social Democrats? Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? So if there's not a case, I think we one more and then I close. Two more, please be short, and then I close the three. Okay.
Thank you.
Because we should also think about the future, friends. Yeah. So.
I'm Michał from Poland. I would like to follow up on the question of my Hungarian colleague, because in Poland we have a similar problem, and my question is more directed to, we have 100th anniversary of independence in Poland this year in November. And we are many historical figures and championed by various parties, mostly nationalist figures and socialist figures like Ignacy Daszyński or Herman Lieberman, who were very prominent in the Austrian parliament, by the way, because I know that you, Mr. Chairman, you are from Austria, because there was an Austrian-Hungarian parliament, the Polish representation was in that parliament. And I mean that this socialist identity of Poland is kind of abandoned by Polish section of S&D because they are a post-communist party and they have an identity problem with it. What's your reflection on this? Thank you.
Okay.
Hello, my name is Vincent Lohkamp from Germany.
Can you please stand up?
Yeah, okay.
And
and my question is actually directed to the future. Do you think that with the existence of fake news and usage of the internet on such a broad spectrum, that there will be a stronger participation in the political engagement by more people?
And then, so.
Okay, there will be probably the next round. Okay, just two very good questions directed to me. I quickly respond them about how to fight the hate speech and fake news and how much it goes against the freedom of speech. I think to a certain extent it's quite problematic and moral argument that brought up by the social media companies, because what we can see on our newsfeed is already a filtered information. It's already a censored information if we think so. I mean, the social media algorithms are selective by nature. So this is also changing the games of the free speech. So when they argue about that this is just going against the hate speech, if there is any argument about they should regulate more what appears there and what not, and they should regulate more what they receive profit from and what not, this is, I think, it's very problematic and it's morally unjust. So I do think that states and political forces should come up with responses on how to fight these things, and if they are putting enough pressure on the social media companies, they will possibly come up with some solutions. The problem is that they are interested in the spreading of the fake news and conspiracy theories because it brings them profit. but on the other hand, I don't think we have to blame everything on them, because I think every media is value neutral. So the television is not evil, the radio is not evil, the social media is not evil. It depends on what do you use it for. And for the next question, I would continue here that can it result to more social participation, the internet and social media and so on? Unfortunately, I think we are over this this euphoric mood around the social media, where we thought that this is a driver of positive political change. In the last few years, we could see more examples that illiberal, authoritarian and populist leaders can exploit more the advantages of the social media than the Democrats. And this is a challenge, I think, to work for. It does not mean that the social media is evil by nature, but it does mean that I think Democrats should do twice as much as the illiberals and the authoritarians to exploit the advantages, because it's just simply easier for the enemies of democracy than for the friends of democracy.
Io voglio rispondere.
So I'm going to reply to the fourth question only, the one about the future and what the future holds in a society which is rampant with fake news, or where the internet dominates, and the whole effect on participation. When I was talking about people, how do you build people that identifies with certain values, but that is also willing to rally? And if I look at our two movements here in Italy, the ones that I am most familiar with, but I think that this probably could apply to Hungary and Poland as well, the two populist movements in Italy, the Northern League and the Five Star Movement, don't just have followers on the internet, they have real followers who exist in the flesh. And they're not just there because of the social media. The social media used to mold these people and to make them homogenous, to make sure they have uniform values, the same political project, and have same ideas about the future in society. So therefore, they have harnessed the social media, knowing that it didn't cost very much and that it's got a high penetration rate. So you didn't have to organize rallies, congresses, meetings. You could get to people's homes, you could find yourself on someone's mobile phone and build these followers. But they don't have just virtual people. They have real people who follow them. And the S&D has to think about their sphere, because there are so many challenges. There are countries where we have been in government and have a very strong past, who have almost been in power for a long time. So how can we... Thank you, Peter. Thanks. I think that we're not making the most of this, but it doesn't replace building real people. We have to use it to redefine the people who will be following us and who identify with this. And I think that some strong ideas and values will then prevail. I think that it is possible, but this is the challenge we face. But there is a kind of delay, if I put it this way. There was a kind of cultural barrier in the fact that populism has become streamlined. So there are the advantages that populism have. Before, the leader can, through social media, speak to the people at any point in time. They don't have to meet them. They use Facebook and internet. The day before yesterday, Minister Salvini posted on Facebook while there was a debate in Parliament. So he almost went above the head of Parliament. As there was a debate, he was posting on Facebook. And of course, we've had the strength of the masses and the people, so we have to think about this challenge, and if we resolve it, then we will be strong, otherwise we won't.
I should answer question 2 and 3. Just before I do that, I wanted to inform you that European Parliament is very active in the case of Facebook. There was, for you, everybody saw Mark Zuckerberg in the Parliament. This was a PR show. It was not a good thing, but we are now very active at the request of our political group in the so-called LIBE Committee, in the Committee for Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs, and we are starting a series of hearings into the whole Facebook thing. There was the first hearing already held last Monday, and it is really intense and really interesting for you. So please follow this debate. There will be 2 more hearings, and there will be also then political conclusions by this. You can follow it via the group, and please do that. And you can also get active and get closer to us, and we will take up your questions. Please do that. And I think there will be many surprising things still coming up, and also political solutions. Hungary and Poland, of course, it's not easy now to answer this in a short way. I'm available for intensive answer and for cooperation. I would ask you, everybody from Eastern Europe who is interested in having more intensive debate what's going on in your or our countries. I'm coming from Austria. We're also some kind East European, or at least infected by Orbanism already. So we could share information. Please do that. I just wanted to tell you, in the case of Hungary, Parliament is preparing an Article 7 procedure against Hungary. This will be voted on the 20th of June. We need a 2/3 majority in plenary, and we're preparing this. So this is not easy, but I'm hopeful that we could get that, and we could give it a push. So we are active on this, and I'm also very sad about the political situation in Hungary, that opposition is not really coming up with a clear alternative. The same applies to Poland. In Poland, we are also active, as I said, and we are, as a political group, opening up ourselves to other political contributors in the country. So we had just recently a discussion with Robert Piedron yesterday in Brussels. We are in contact with Barbara Nowacka, and so there is something in preparation which should be bigger than it is in the moment, because we know if there is nothing happening in Poland, this will be very bad for Europe. So Poland could also be the key for turning the whole thing, yeah? Because if we win back Poland, then I think we are on the right track in Europe, and therefore it is so important. And this is actually leading to the second part already of our discussions, what can be done. Yeah? So I'm ready for everything, and we will try to manage it that you can stay in contact, because we also want to have more information from young people in the East European countries, because if we lose East Europe, we lose Europe, completely clear. So coming to the second part, what can be done, what shall we do, what you want to contribute. Yeah? So let's be a little bit optimistic. It's a bit late already, but who is optimistic? Raise your hands. So there are at least a few people who who share this optimism, but I think we may contribute to this optimistic mood. Yeah. So, who wants to take the floor? We are now. Please confine yourself to 1 minute, and the more confine themselves, the more can speak. Yeah. 1, 2. Albin. Yeah.
So, as you said, there are plenty of things, and we need to be optimistic regarding even the things that we have to do in Europe.
Is it better probably you stand up so others can see you? Yeah. Sorry for that. Yeah. Fine.
Hi everyone. I'm Anna from Albania. Thank you for your speech. So, me myself, I'm very optimistic on things that can be done, but for sure there are many things that we need to change, and it needs more dynamic and more seriosity in the jobs that we do. So, what can be done regarding Eastern Europe? Since I am from Albania, I think there are plenty of things that we have to interfere, and we have to tackle the problems, because we set an European agenda, but does this European agenda let's say, fits to every country? For example, we have different problems in Western Europe and different problems in Eastern Europe. During the seminars and sessions we do with young European socialists, but also with USI, the International Youth Socialist, the Eastern countries have different problems regarding the youth, but not only, is unemployment, is the level of education and interventions that we have to do regarding innovation and the labor market. So I think that first of all, we have also a brain drain inside Europe, especially in Eastern Europe, and the level of corruption is really high. So maybe we should start raising some platforms that can increase the level of education, that can develop the youth of Eastern countries. For example, building youth centers as the one that have the focus on the human rights and democracy, like the one that is in Strasbourg and the one in Budapest, but another one regarding the economy of the Europe. For example, an agency set for the youth that can tackle the economic problems, or maybe an innovation hub that develops ideas for the future of Europe, the production and the labor market. Maybe as social democrats we can build platforms that can deal with the problems that we face, the overpopulation of metropolis and the abandonment of, let's say, other zones. I think this is a problem that we all discussed in groups, the inner migration, and how can we, let's say, send the labor market to the places and not bring the people to the jobs. These are things that we can work on.
Thank you.
Merci, je vais m'exprimer en français.
Thank you very much. I'd like to speak in French. I would just like to mention that I come from Kosovo. And the Balkans, aside from Croatia, of course, are not yet members of the European Union. So my question is for Ms. Marini, but also for Mr. Weidenholzer and for Mr. Kreco about the enlargement of the European Union. In the Committee of the Regions, or people are thinking about this enlargement within the Balkan region, specifically one which is not recognized by 5 members of the EU, which is Kosovo. And I'm wondering about the position of the S&D. Is it to continue with the enlargement, especially when taking into account Brexit? And could that be a response to show that the people are strong, that they're present? And if so, are there any projects in the pipelines, for example, any cross-border projects such as those that exist between Albania and Kosovo, Kosovo and Serbia, Kosovo and its neighbors, in fact, where we're dealing with interregional projects? Those exist. Is the Committee of the Regions thinking about supporting and helping them in those projects with European funds? Thank you very much.
First row for the moment, and then just indicate clearly who else wants to take the floor. So, him. Sorry. Okay?
Hi. Yes? Okay, sorry, technology. I was, first of all, thank all the speakers for their contributions, and I would just want to say that I raised my hand about being optimistic. Maybe I wouldn't have done so a couple of days ago, because you hear all those bad news, and out of Hungary, out of Eastern Europe, with and the rare news, like the good news out of Ireland, are so rare. Yeah, but meeting all those people here has inspired me very much, and I think all of us can do a small part to making Europe better, to advancing the cause of social democracy, socialist democracy. And I wanted to ask a little more if you can elaborate on the proceedings for the Article 7. What has been going on there, because I'm curious, but if we don't have time, that's fine as well. And yeah, thank you.
Could you just tell us where you come from?
Yeah, I'm from Germany.
Okay. It is sometimes not easy to identify who is coming from. We all know we are from Europe, and this is the good story about it, yeah?
Hello, Mateusz. I'm Mateusz from Warsaw, from Poland, from Razem, like a new left. Sorry for my outfit, but my luggage still didn't appear, so I feel bad with that. But you all look very pretty, and myself, I have no chance. Sorry. Okay, no matter. Thanks. Well. I just want to put two thoughts I have on the multiculturalism workshop. Like, shouldn't we put harder regulations on the regular media? My thought came from my experience of watching the TV news program from Poland from before 1989. I was amazed, first of all, how long that program was. It was 1 hour, not 20 minutes like it's now. And secondly, how many news from outside of Europe were there, from India, from Chile, from really the countries that nowadays I don't see in the telly, in the main evening TV news program, never. Or, you know, if there is a tornado or explosion in the mine, then maybe, but not like a regular news about their political or social issues. Maybe we should really think about how these mainstream media are presenting the, you know, the areas like my region, for example, which from your perspective looks like a peripheria, and maybe that's the point, that there should be some quota, there should be some space for that as well. My second thought is like last minute, because the idea of the theme of the day is identity and citizenship, and we mentioned that there are 10 years from this financial crisis that was like starting in America and then was in many different places. I just wonder if the billionaires has the identity and the citizenship, and if I may ask you, like, what tools were invented by the European Parliament to not have ever again the situation like was with that crisis, that the people that create that crisis were sentenced only in one country in the world, and that was Iceland. Like, what tools you developed for that 10 years to make that situation never ever happen again, that the people that create the financial troubles that damage so many societies in Europe and around the world, like, they will be punished if they will do that ever again. Thank you.
So, I have seen more hands. Take one more, and then I think we make a round and we can collect questions again. Yeah?
Okay, hello everybody again. It's me again. I'm Leon from Germany, and I just saw like a lot of people that were really optimistic, and I have to say I'm actually not following this lead. We have elections next year, and remember 2014 when there were the scary results for the French nationalists, also for UKIP, and that was scary in 2014, and I'm really, really scared of the elections in 2019. I'm really scared that we have like a parliament for the first time which could actually be Eurosceptic in the majority, and this is something we have to fight with everything we can, especially us, the Social Democrats. Thank you. Especially us, the Social Democrats, we always have been against fascism, for a community of people working together, and this means that we have to become the party of not the elites but of everyone again, as Mr. Pitella said really excellent earlier. That means we have to get into a bus, we have to get through Europe and talk to the people in every member state, in every region, what are the things that they wish for a better Europe, for a better future, so we can actually develop a joint party program which lead to a better Europe, to a better socialist Europe, and to a better future in general for our citizens. Thank you.
Okay. So I think we make a short round and then go back to the audience. You want to take the floor, Peter? You? No, not for now.
Io voglio rispondere.
Yes, I would like to answer the question on enlargement. I don't think that we can give up on the idea of enlargement. And we've got to continue working hard to include all the Balkan countries as well. Albania and all the other countries in the Balkans. The Committee of the Regions represents cities and regions and represents, therefore, the institutions that are the closest to European citizens. And it has always been convinced of the need to build an inclusive Europe, and we have worked hard for this. So we've wanted these countries to be included. But there's a question that springs to mind. When I was more or less your age, the Berlin Wall fell, and there weren't any young people in Europe, whether in the old Europe of 12 member states, ever doubted that the ultimate objective would be enlargement and inclusion, and that this future meant above all, not just welfare, but more democracy, more freedom, and more opportunities. But if I look at these countries that joined in the big wave of enlargement in 2004 and look at the dominant cultures, how people are voting, the national debate in the countries you come from, I'm asking myself the following. The enlargement was something that the people wanted. Take Poland, Hungary, the Czech Republic. The enlargement was in the hands of the people who really believed the EU was the future. And now it seems that these same peoples are disillusioned. So the right wing and populist forces have based their policies on this disillusionment and have become authoritarian in many cases. So we cannot impose enlargement from above. We cannot impose enlargement from the institutions downwards. So it has to be a bottom-up approach. We have to convince that Europe can be of use to those who live in Kosovo, Serbia, Albania, that the EU can be useful. And we've had we've had a debate on Turkey joining for 10 years. I think that if you go to Turkey now, there's probably only a minority that feels that the prosperity of Turkey and its well-being hinges on joining the EU. So the socialist family faces this challenge too. Enlargement, the way we saw it 10, 15 years ago, is not enough. If we go about it that way, we won't be able to forge a consensus. We won't be able to forge a consensus in the EU or in the countries that might think that Europe is a key to the future and that European institutions are the future. So I think that we have to go back to this feeling, but also make sure that the European project is interesting, appealing, exciting, and that people want to be involved in. It has to be a sentimental project. It has to be about emotions and not just about what we think about. We have to rebuild Europe with our hearts and not just our heads. And that's the only way that we will make enlargement appealing for these countries. So yes to enlargement, but let us be very careful about how we go about it this time around.
Thank you. I also want to inform you that our political group is very active on the Western Balkans. We have a so-called Willy Brandt steering group, which is meeting every month, and we are very active in this. And for us, it is clear that the West Balkan has a European perspective, and we have to solve this problem. And the longer we do not solve it, the more complicated it gets. So it's a clear yes. Again, Article 7. So who wants to talk with me afterwards? I think we can discuss it more in detail. For me, this is essential. We have to bring back Hungary to democracy. And Hungary, for our political family, is very important because the Hungarians have been the first fighting communism. They had been the first in 1956 who really rised up, and therefore it is essential. And we have to join our forces. We have to be more active on this. So please, if you are interested, I'm ready to share all the details with you. You said economic crisis, and I would say we tried it as political group, but we failed. We failed because we had maybe not so active as we should have been, and we did not have the majority. But there's a lot of things which should have been much more clearer, financial, all the financial taxes, for instance, all these questions. We were actually we did not deliver as we have done it, and that's a problem because it falls back on us. Yeah? If you do not solve a problem, you cannot postpone it; it comes back. And yeah, the European elections are essential, and I think we have to fight for it everywhere. For the moment, we are in all 28 member states, and I still have some hope that there will be 28 member states still existing. Yeah, but it's another thing. But we have in all our member states members of the European Parliament. We are the only political group, yeah, and we want to keep that. But it means that we have to fight everywhere, and our group decided to use a different language now. We have a battle plan. We agreed on this, but we also found out that our language sometimes is not understandable. So we need a new framing. We have to be more to the people's need and have to use not a bureaucratic language, but a language people understand. So this will be part of our election activities, and of course we have also be clear about the issues, and we have to take up more the questions related to everybody's lives and not just to academic questions. So we have to really tackle the real needs and problems of people. But there's another round still possible, so I would ask you now to contribute to the final, most final round. Yeah, in the third row. Can you please give him the mic?
Hi, I'm Imanol from Spain, and I have two questions, completely different, but we talk about that we have to build social consensus when it comes to making countries come into to join the European project, but we also said that it's very difficult to make EU countries to agree, but I don't think it's difficult. I think it's impossible. Just to put one example, currently Spain won't accept ever Kosovo to join the European Union for the Catalan issue that we have. So, and as Spain, as other members have veto power in these issues, should that change? And then my second question is, towards next year European elections, should we consider an Spitzenkandidat model? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Bernadette. I'm from Germany, and the question was about the future and whether we are optimistic about it. And actually, very recently, I realized that social democracy is the future, is the only future we can go if the European Union as a concept should work. Because until now, we started after a war, after horrors, and now and then there was this willingness to cooperate on an economic level, which was good, which was a first step. But I think now it's a time for not only cultural interaction, but especially social interaction. We cannot promote an economic union that is profit is made on the back of the poorest members of the union, and it's in favor of the strong economies that are already running well. And then we have this difference with the brain drain, and we're kind of not solidarity. There's no solidarity between the member states. So I do think that social is the only way to go, because our current economic union is causing problems on a social level that is currently solved on a national level. And only with cooperation on this level, the European future is bright. So I do think, and I'm really inspired by coming together with all of you and share this opinion. But now it's our duty to not only remain in our circles and remain with similar-minded people and say like, yeah, so good, I share your opinion. But I think it's important that we are recognizing our privilege, and that we are not staying in this educational elite situation, that we're not staying remoted from our roots or from our people, but that we are the ones bridging our origins with the European idea. And we talked a lot about identity and these layers, and I think it's really important to know where you come from, but it's really important to know where you're going to. And I do think that we're going towards a EU that definitely needs the Social Democrats.
Who else? Last chance? Yeah.
Okay, so I'm Patricia from Poland, and I have a question about what can we give as a progressive movement, because the populist movement, especially here in Poland, which is like vital topic for me, what we as a progressive people can give to people, because they feel left alone without anything that they could possibly get from us. They tend to value more the social kind of help and the feeling of security with a pinch of this propaganda, anti-Semitic, anti-migrant propaganda? What can we give them instead? What can we do to convince people that the social democratic vision of words is probably the best vision? Thank you.
Thank you. Peter, you want?
Yeah, I think these were very important thoughts, and I would follow up on two of the remarks. One of the need to talk about the ones that are not like-minded to us, and the other one on the European parliamentary elections. I think it will probably sound a bit blunt and provocative, but I think one reason for the success of the populist right in Europe these days is that liberals and social democrats have become lazy, a bit lazy in terms of reaching out to people. And there is an increasing tendency by populist right wing to push the democratic societies in this tribalist mode where there are the different tribes and you don't really have the chance as, let's say, a liberal or social democrat to go to the other tribe and talk to them because the information channels are closed and everyone is living in the echo chambers. So I think this is the vested interest of the social democrats to break these tribes, break these echo chambers, step out of the comfort zones and stop just talking about the ones who already agree with us and go to places where you will be contradicted, go to places where you can have some substantial debate and have an impact on other people. And this is not easy. I mean, anyone who have already tries it know that it's difficult, but this is the only way to go. If we just talk to ourselves, it's always more comfortable, but politically it brings nothing. And the problem is that there is this populist zeitgeist, there is this momentum of the populist right. So I think the efforts should be doubled. Otherwise, I think there would be just further rise. And yes, it's true that identity. So right now, the populist right is the force that can provide a very strong identity for the people. And this is this ethnocentric, ethnicist identity. I think probably the European identity could be something that should be politicized even more to be able to give an alternative to this nationalist, tribalist identity hysteria that is provoked by the far right.
A me ha molto colpito la
I was quite taken aback by Bernadette's remarks. Maybe it wasn't Bernadette, it was a German lady, I can't remember her name. So it struck me because I think that's the crux of the matter. We're talking about populist forces and the right that want to take Europe apart and take part of the European institutions apart. So, but there's the issue of appearing as those who protect Europe and resist. So the challenge is whether the socialists and Democrats can imagine a Europe. Can you not hear the English booth? English on channel 2? So we have to be in a situation where we can imagine a changed Europe, a changing Europe. So we have come across as closed in on ourselves, and we have come across as those who are holding on to Europe and keeping it as it is, unchanged. And while European citizens want us to work on a different kind of economic, political and social future for Europe. And there is Italian data that struck me. Apparently, when they were trying to cobble together a government here in Italy, and with this huge threat of Italy leaving the euro, if you were to look at the polls, there was really a kind of a defensive reaction. So there was a kind of fear that Italy would leave Europe, and there was fear. So I think we can win the battle, but we need to do something about change. The right wing has given its interpretation to change by focusing on national protectionism, saying that Europe is dangerous and Europe is responsible for everything that is going wrong in our countries. But we cannot be seen as defending the status quo. We have to make sure that we can depict a European future. We have to do more and better than the others. So hopefully have we the capacity, the intelligence and the ability to work on these thoughts that will lead to a new European idea. And institutions where politics are at the forefront. It shouldn't just be an EU that is based on technical structures or about applying the rules. It shouldn't just be about Europe being compatible with the status quo. It has to be about an EU where politics are at the center of the debate, and all will hinge on choices. And of course, we'll have to see what happens in 2019. So we can win, but we have to make sure that the institutions move forward and not backwards. But then these institutions have to reconnect with the people. Now they're seen as so far off because we don't know how the European Commission is chosen. The Council is seen as just all the governments together, again seen as distant. We have to inject democratic and popular legitimacy into the EU, and therefore politics have to be at the heart of the EU institutions. I think if we manage this, then we really will be defending a future that will be in the interest of the citizens. Otherwise, we're just protecting the more conservative parts of society, even though we define ourselves as progressives.
So. Kosovo and Spain is a problem, but there's always a solution if you have a problem, and I'm sure that Spanish government is. And in this condition, there will be possibilities if the situation is to be decided. Regarding Peter and what you were talking about, I think what really would be important, and if I would have a wish, then I would say we should contribute to a project where we create some kind of media together, yeah? Because the right is also had created its own media. The left has not had this, and the only example is the United Kingdom, where the Momentum movement really created an instrument, and in a country where the press is so reactionary as in the United Kingdom, it was actually people themselves who joined the Labour Party and then who created a new understanding of the situation. So I think we could really and we can really contribute if we just use our brains and be more active in creating these instruments. We need this for the European elections. We have to be more concentrated on the things we share together. And last point, social democracy. Someone said, and other one asked, what can be done in our region, yeah? And I would say there was a crisis 70 years ago which led to fascism. But in this crisis was one country where social democracy gave the first answer before the collapse. This was Sweden. And I don't know who is from Sweden here. Yeah, but in Sweden you had Hjalmar Branting, and he had an idea, and I think this idea is great. He said the country should become a kind of people's home, Folkehemmet. Everybody in the country is part of this Folkehemmet, of this people's home. And this actually would deliver the message of belonging, would deliver the message that you have a right to gain something and you are not left alone. And this really happened in the early 1930s when he developed this concept. And I think as Social Democrats, as a conclusion of all the discussions, we should call for this people's home where we all are equal members, where everybody can enter this house, and where everybody has access to everything in this house. So there is possibilities, and we should not always be just despaired and following the discourse of the right. Yeah? We have the right answers. We are the ones who can really solve the problems, and thank you very much. The day was long. We still have another point. We have to go now to see the Chervi project, and thank you very much, and see you soon, and let's celebrate in 2019.